Have you ever truly looked at yourself, not through the lens of social media, reputation, or others' expectations, but with an unfiltered, honest gaze? We spend our whole lives trying to become some version of ourselves, yet rarely pause to ask, who am I really? In a noisy world that demands instant reactions, instant comparisons, and instant results, there lies a path that runs against the current, ancient, unshaken, and powerful. It is Stoicism. No theatrics, no flattery, just a compass for those who seek self-mastery, clarity, and the kind of inner steadiness that stands firm like stone in a storm. And if you're weary from the weight of negative emotions, if you feel adrift in questions without answers, this video might just be the beginning of your awakening. 1. Observe yourself as if you were a stranger. Learning to observe yourself as if you were someone else is a foundational skill in the practice of Stoicism. It's not about avoidance or emotional detachment. It's the first step toward awareness, where you can clearly recognize what you're thinking, what you are feeling, and why you are reacting the way you are. By applying this principle, you momentarily step out of the role of the experiencer and take on the perspective of a neutral observer, like watching a film in which you're the protagonist. In that distance, clarity arises. Instead of being swept up in the storm of emotion, you gain a panoramic view, seeing the causes, the consequences, and the alternate paths you could have taken. The most important rule in this practice is non-judgment. You don't take the observer's seat to label yourself as right or wrong, strong or weak, but simply to see things as they are. This is the key to why free self-observation holds such power. It lets you reach truth undistorted by emotion, expectation, or fear. For instance, when you notice yourself erupting in anger over something trivial, don't rush to justify or feel ashamed. Instead, pause and ask, where did this anger come from? What is this feeling trying to tell me? Was that reaction truly necessary? These questions, though simple, are powerful. They shift you from a passive state to an active one, from a victim to a master of response. This ability to step outside yourself also reveals the deeply ingrained reflexes that shape how you respond to life. Many of our actions are not choices, they're automatic. Rejection instantly wounds. Criticism triggers defense. Another's success stirs comparison or envy. But when you observe these reflexes without engaging them, you create a rare and vital space between stimulus and response. And in that space lies your freedom. You can choose silence over outburst. You can choose forgiveness over resentment. You can choose calm over panic. Self-observation also opens the door to inner honesty. When you stop trying to polish your image, you begin to see what's really there. You see both strength and weakness, success and error, what you've done well, and what still needs work. None of it appears to shame or overwhelm you, but to help you understand where you stand on your path of growth. That honesty may be uncomfortable, but it's the gateway to all real transformation. You can't change a habit you don't recognize. You can't heal a wound you won't admit exists. Moreover, with consistent practice, observation becomes second nature. You start to move through life a little slower, breathe a little deeper before reacting, and view events as data, not personal attacks. When someone says something harsh, you no longer feel instantly wounded. You see a person sending out a signal, and you choose how to respond. When faced with hardship, you don't sorrow. You see it as a challenge, an opportunity to exercise composure, reason, and inner resilience. Observing yourself from a distance also frees you from the roles society casts you in. In life, we often become fused with our identities: child, friend, employee, partner. But when you step outside those roles, you realize the essence of who you are isn't bound to any of them. You are the one feeling, observing, learning. And that realization is the beginning of freedom, because once you are no longer trapped by performance, you can choose who to become, not to please others, but to live in alignment with your deepest values. In the end, observing yourself as though you were a stranger isn't a theoretical trick. It's a way of living. It takes discipline because you are training a mental muscle long neglected in the digital age. But with practice, you'll start to feel lighter, clearer, and more in command of your life. When you understand what's truly happening within, you don't just manage your emotions. You begin to shape your destiny. And that is what Stoicism ultimately points to. A life lived with intention, awareness, and inner freedom. 2. Embracing the self. Light and shadow alike. Self-acceptance is not an excuse to stop growing, nor is it surrender to personal limitations. In the Stoic spirit, accepting oneself is the first and indispensable step on the path to inner growth. But what matters is how we accept. Without embellishment, without denial, and without rejecting any part of who we are formed from both light and shadow, from noble qualities as well as hidden fractures and unnamed corners of the soul. To only love the admirable parts, the traits that earn praise, is not true acceptance, but a subtle form of self-deception. As we journey inward to observe and understand ourselves, nothing disheartens us faster than encountering aspects of our nature we wish weren't there. It might be selfishness, irritability, envy, or a nameless fear that quietly holds us back. The first instinct is often denial. That's not me. I've moved past that. Or, it wasn't my fault. Yet this denial is precisely what traps us in inner conflict. Stoicism doesn't dismiss the existence of darkness within us. It simply demands that we face it with honesty and then act with reason. Acceptance doesn't cancel the responsibility to change. On the contrary, it gives us the clearest tool for change, the unfiltered understanding of where we are and who we truly are. Nothing more, nothing less. To accept oneself is also to return to a simple truth we tend to forget. We are a process, not a finished product. Along that journey, we will make mistakes, feel disappointed, and choose paths we later regret. But the point is not to erase those chapters. It's to see them as essential parts of our growth. Like scars on the body, they don't lessen our worth. They testify that we've fought, endured, and moved forward. Another element of self-acceptance is learning to forgive ourselves. Many people carry lingering guilt, an internal sentence that never gets lifted. They punish themselves by refusing joy, refusing second chances, refusing to believe in their own worth. But forgiveness isn't forgetting, and it's not making excuses. Forgiveness is an act of wisdom. It sees the mistake, understands the cause, extracts the lesson, and chooses to move forward. Stoicism doesn't encourage dwelling in the past. It urges us to focus on the present, where we can become better than yesterday through the understanding we hold today. Furthermore, self-acceptance opens the door to compassion. When you are honest about your own shadows, you no longer judge others harshly when theirs show through. You begin to understand that everyone carries an invisible battle. It's this deep empathy that builds real human connection, one not built on false expectations or polished images. We don't need to be perfect to be loved. We only need to be genuine to truly connect. Ultimately, accepting yourself doesn't mean staying where you are. It's the foundation from which a better version of yourself can emerge. When you know who you are, you begin to see what you need to grow. When you stop wasting energy denying the parts you dislike, you gain the strength to transform them. True change doesn't come from fleeting inspiration. It arises from deep understanding and honest acceptance. And from that steady ground, You begin to step beyond the cycle of blame and self-criticism toward a life led by reason, resilience, and inner freedom, the essence of Stoic living. 3. Forging the will. Beginning with the smallest things, training the will is one of the central pillars of Stoicism, not through grand gestures or bold declarations, but by starting with the smallest, most seemingly insignificant acts, the very places where enduring inner strength is quietly built. Stoicism is not concerned with the appearance of achievement, but with the depth of discipline. For the practitioner of this philosophy, every daily task becomes an opportunity to temper the will. Waking up on time, washing dishes right after a meal, or sitting still in silence while the mind stirs in chaos, not because these actions are inherently important, but because they are done with intention, free from mood or circumstance. The essence of willpower is not found in sudden bursts of strength, but in consistency under ordinary conditions. It's not about whether you can endure hardship for an hour, but whether you can make the right choice again and again without fanbourity. That demands a state of awareness where you don't act on impulse, but from what reason tells you is needed. It is this continuous choice that lays the foundation for a will that does not waver under external pressure. A common mistake we often make is waiting for the right moment to begin changing. Tomorrow, when motivation strikes; next week, when life is calmer; next year, when conditions are better. But Stoic thought reminds us, change doesn't arrive with perfect timing. It begins with present choices, even the smallest ones. If you seek strength of character, you won't build it through monumental acts. You start with simple, repeatable behaviors each day. It might be 5 minutes of journaling in the morning, declining an invitation that you know would distract you, or finally, completing a task you've long delayed. As you begin to train your will through small things, you'll quickly realize that inner strength is not a gift. It's the product of accumulation. Each time you rise above laziness, delay, or emotional reactivity, you're doing more than checking off a task. You're sending a message to your mind: I am in control, not my emotions. And repeated often enough, that message becomes part of who you are, a foundation strong enough to face greater trials without fear or collapse. Stoicism teaches that every deliberate action is a form of training. As you move through life with awareness, you begin to see opportunities to practice everywhere. A difficult conversation becomes a chance to exercise calm. A weary day becomes a test of perseverance. A final mistake becomes a moment to practice self-forgiveness and inner resilience. No situation is meaningless if you meet it with the mindset of one who is training to become steadfast. The beauty of this practice is that the more you train your will through small acts, the more attuned you become to your own weaknesses. Not to judge, but to adjust. You start to notice when you want to give up, when emotion begins to take the lead, when you choose what's easy over what's right. And in each of those moments, you get to choose again. You don't have to win every battle, just one more today than yesterday. That alone is enough to build a will that endures. In the end, training your will is not about controlling every situation. It's about controlling yourself no matter the situation. Each small act during your day is a test. Will you choose what is right or what is easy? Will you retreat or advance? Will you delay or begin? These questions repeat daily, and each time you choose what is right, even in the smallest way, you're shaping the force that helps you meet life with courage, clarity, and unshakable resolve. And that is how the will is forged, not in a single moment, but in every step, every choice, every mindful breath you take. 4. Stop comparing. Return to your own path. Comparing yourself to others is an almost reflexive habit in today's world, especially when we are constantly exposed to curated images of success, wealth, happiness, and perfection on social media. Each time we scroll past a beautiful photo, a success story, or an inspiring post, it's easy for the mind to slip into feelings of inadequacy, pressure, and self-doubt. But from a Stoic perspective, comparison is one of the fastest ways to weaken the will and lose your inner autonomy, because it pulls your focus toward things outside your control, someone else's life, path, or pace, instead of anchoring it to the only thing you truly command, your own journey. When you constantly measure yourself against what others have or achieve, you unconsciously set external standards to determine your self-worth. This makes it easy to lose appreciation for your own small wins, just because they don't sparkle like someone else's. And the more you fall into comparison, the more likely you are to overlook what truly matters. You are progressing, but because the standards you've adopted aren't your own, they are borrowed from someone else, you can't fully feel the growth you've earned. It becomes a toxic loop. Constant comparison breeds a sense of lack, which leads to dissatisfaction, which pushes you to chase an ideal that was never yours to begin with. Stoicism teaches that each person has their own fate, their own path, their own pace. No one else can walk that path for you, and in turn, you shouldn't and don't need to walk someone else's. The only comparison that holds meaning is the one between who you are today and who you were yesterday. That's the only fair and meaningful standard, because you know where you began, what you've endured, and where you are headed. When you choose yourself as the measuring stick, you begin to see true progress, quiet, steady, and self-affirmed. It's enough to know that today you are more patient, more grounded, or more courageous than you were yesterday. Stopping comparison doesn't mean abandoning growth or goals. It means learning to locate yourself accurately in the long arc of your own journey and measuring progress by personal effort, not by someone else's success. You can't control if someone started ahead of you, had more advantages, or achieved more quickly, but you can control whether you take one step forward today. And that is where your focus, your pride, and your resolve should live. One of the deepest gifts of letting go of comparison is the inner relief that follows. When you are no longer racing against someone else's shadow, you begin to live in tune with your own rhythm. You know when to rest, when to move, and you no longer feel guilty for moving slower than someone else, because you've come to understand that your journey is uniquely yours. And on that path, what matters most isn't how fast you go, but whether you're heading in the right direction. Some paths must be walked slowly to be felt. Some lessons only emerge when you're patient, and some achievements only arrive when you stay true to yourself. Practically speaking, stepping away from comparison can begin with small habits: reducing exposure to content that triggers inadequacy, redefining goals based on personal values rather than social trends, and journaling regularly to track your own growth over time. When you shift your attention from outward to inward, you begin to cultivate a genuine inner strength, one that doesn't falter when someone is better, richer, or more well-known than you. You know your peace doesn't come from others' accomplishments. It comes from walking your own path with integrity. Ultimately, ending the cycle of comparison isn't just a psychological strategy for ease. It's a profound act of self-respect. It signals that you are clear enough to know what belongs to you and what doesn't, that you are mature enough to recognize that every person moves to their own rhythm, and you don't need to sacrifice your inner peace to chase someone else's tempo. When you truly return to your own path, you don't just live authentically, you live freely, free from comparison, free from the pressure to mimic, free from the burden of proving yourself. And in that freedom, you begin to grow, not into someone else, but into exactly who you were meant to be. 5. Radical responsibility. Radical responsibility is one of the most vital principles in Stoicism, and one of the hardest to live by. It asks us to stop blaming circumstances, people, or society, and instead face the truth. We alone choose the direction of our lives. This doesn't mean everything that happens is our fault. It means that how we respond in every situation remains fully within our control. In a world of chaos and uncertainty, maintaining this mindset is how we avoid becoming victims of fate, and instead become co-authors of it. The moment we stop making excuses is the moment we begin to reclaim our power. We often say, "I don't have time. I was born into hardship. I'm just not as lucky." But every one of those statements carries a hidden message. I don't control my life. If we keep living from that belief, change never happens, because we've handed the keys to forces beyond our reach. Stoicism doesn't deny the existence of uncontrollables, like the weather, public opinion, the economy, or our past. But it insists there is always one thing that belongs to us: how we respond, how we choose, how we live after the storm. Responsibility shows up not only in big decisions, like changing careers or ending a toxic relationship, but in small daily choices, choosing silence over an impulsive reaction, keeping a promise instead of postponing it, getting out of bed instead of hitting snooze. These small acts, done with intention, gradually shape someone who can be trusted, not just by others, but by themselves. Because real confidence doesn't come from convincing the world. It comes from knowing you can rely on yourself to do what's right, even when no one's watching. Owning our lives also means having the courage to face consequences. Sometimes we make the wrong call, hurt someone, or stray from our core values. In those moments, blaming the situation or making excuses may feel easier, but it only prolongs the pain and delays our growth. Stoicism urges us to admit our mistakes, not to punish ourselves, but to learn, correct, and move forward. Only when we truly own our missteps can we extract the lessons they hold and become better. No real change comes from denial. Every transformation begins with acceptance. Living with responsibility also pulls us out of passivity. Instead of waiting for someone to save us for the right moment or the perfect condition, we learn to begin with what we have. We stop expecting others to understand us, fix us, or change for us, and instead take ownership from within. That shift not only grants us a sense of freedom, it awakens inner strength, because once we realize we always have a choice, we stop feeling powerless. We begin to see life as something we navigate, not something that drags us along. The deepest level of responsibility leads to the highest form of self-respect. When you own your actions, your words, and your decisions, you no longer need outside validation. You become the witness of your own growth. And that alone is enough to nourish true confidence, integrity, and self-worth. You stop needing to prove yourself because you know you are living in alignment with the values that matter most to you. Responsibility is not a burden. It's a privilege. It is proof that you've stepped beyond the role of a child, waiting to be guided, excused, or protected, and stepped into adulthood in its truest form. The kind that recognizes you can't control everything, but you can always control how you think, how you act, and how you show up every day. And in doing so, you don't just build a life of direction. You become a quiet force of inspiration to others. Through your consistency, your discipline, and the strength you cultivate in each responsible choice, day by day. 6. Filter the noise. Choose your influences wisely. In a world overflowing with information, filtering is no longer a luxury. It is a survival skill to protect the clarity and well-being of the mind. Stoicism, grounded in the principle of controlling what we can control, makes one thing clear: if you don't consciously choose what you give your attention to, the world will choose for you. And the truth is, the world doesn't care about your peace, your career, or your growth. It cares about clicks, attention, and emotional reaction. If you don't guard what enters your mind, you'll soon find yourself swept up by emotions, overwhelmed by noise, and drained by things that were never worth your energy. This is why filtering the noise, being selective about your influence, is essential in the Stoic pursuit of self-mastery. Filtering noise isn't just about silencing notifications or reducing screen time. It's a way of living. You don't let everything touch you by default. You choose who to listen to, what to read, where to participate, and which conversations to engage in, because you understand that everything you encounter leaves a trace on your mind, whether it's a toxic headline, a negative exchange, or a pointless distraction. These things don't just pass through and disappear. As we often assume, they accumulate. They subtly shape how you view the world, how you view others, and more dangerously, how you view yourself. We often talk about eating clean to stay physically healthy, yet forget that the mind too has a diet. If you feed it hours of content filled with comparison, judgment, outrage, or pessimism, you can't expect to remain calm, focused, or clear-headed. Just as no one stays healthy on a toxic diet, you can't build inner strength without being mindful of what you consume. Stoicism reminds us, you can't control the chaos out there, but you can control what you allow into your inner world. And that's where real freedom begins. Curation doesn't only apply to information, it applies to people. Some people expand your thinking, lift your spirit, and inspire you to live better. Others, intentionally or not, plant doubt, drain your energy, and cloud your direction. Stoicism doesn't teach us to avoid people, but to recognize their influence. Not everyone deserves regular access to your life. Not every conversation is worth your attention. Not every relationship should be maintained out of politeness or habit. You don't have to cut people off, but you do need to be clear about who lifts you and who weighs you down. Growth often begins by walking away from toxic loops, not with drama or blame, but with quiet clarity and a different choice. Filtering also means shaping your physical and mental environment to support your growth. That might mean carving out a quiet space to read, shutting down screens an hour before bed, following only channels that inspire you, or simply beginning your morning in silence instead of scrolling. These small actions, when done consistently, create a positive ecosystem where you're in control. You no longer drift in the chaos of the outside world. You live by the rhythm you set from within. Deliberate, focused, and protected by discipline. In the end, filtering the noise is a powerful act of self-respect. When you choose what gets your attention, you're telling the world, I honor my time, my mind, and my energy. And with that self-respect, you realize you don't need to concede everything, know everything, or be part of every conversation. You only need to know what makes you wiser, calmer, and closer to who you are becoming, and choose that again and again, every single day. 7. Give freely and become a light to others. One of the most common misconceptions about Stoicism is that it's a closed-off philosophy, focused solely on inner life and disconnected from the outside world. But the truth is quite the opposite. A true Stoic doesn't seek calm just for themselves. They see spreading value to others as an essential part of their inner development. Because once you grow spiritually, you can't help but notice the pain, confusion, and wounds others carry. And if you've ever been there yourself, if you've ever pulled yourself out of mental chaos, you understand the power of a well-timed word, a small act of kindness, or a look free from judgment. That's where you begin to become a light to others, not through grand gestures, but through small, powerful choices made every day. Stoicism doesn't call you to be a savior or blindly sacrifice yourself for the greater good. It calls you to take responsibility for your influence. Every action, how you answer a question, how you handle conflict, how you listen to someone's anxiety, carries weight. You don't need to be perfect to help someone. You just need to be present with sincerity. In a modern world where loneliness is common, your full presence, unrushed, undefended, non-judgmental, is one of the greatest gifts you can offer. Stoic thought emphasizes that personal growth is not just about building inner strength. It's about shifting from ego to a sense of shared humanity. As you become more grounded, you remain calm in chaos, navigate conflict without losing composure, and speak truth without causing harm. And these qualities, quietly and consistently practiced, become a living example to those around you. You don't need to preach. You don't need to persuade. You simply live in alignment with your values. And in doing so, you show others a different way, a path of self-mastery, stillness, and compassion. Giving doesn't have to be material or monumental. Sometimes it's sharing a personal story to remind someone they're not alone. Sometimes it is holding back a sarcastic remark to protect the peace around you. Sometimes it's patiently listening when someone can't quite find their words. Sometimes it's stepping out of your comfort zone to stand for something you believe in, even when it's unpopular. These acts, rooted in Stoic intention, aren't about recognition. They are done because they are the right thing to do. And when you act not for reward, but out of integrity, that's when you truly embody the philosophy's essence. Giving also strengthens your own inner stability. When your focus turns outward, when you actively try to bring value to others, you naturally create distance from the negative thoughts, worries, or frustrations that often dominate the mind. Giving becomes a reverse current. Instead of absorbing, you radiate, and in that act, you become brighter, clearer, and lighter. Your mind stops orbiting around personal lack or disappointment and begins to merge with something greater, a current of kindness, connection, and lasting value. Finally, being a light to others doesn't mean you won't feel tired or uncertain. It simply means that in any situation, you still choose to live by what you believe is right. Even when you're hurting, you choose not to hurt others. Even if you're not fully healed, you choose to bring comfort to those beside you. And even while quietly wrestling your own darkness, you still light a small lamp, not just to guide yourself, but so that someone else might find their way. That is the Stoic spirit, not to blaze with brilliance, but to burn steadily, patiently, and to show up when someone else needs a light to keep going. When I first started exploring Stoicism, what struck me most wasn't the famous quotes or lofty philosophies. It was the realization that someone had finally articulated what I had long felt, but never named. We cannot control the world, but we can control ourselves. In a chaotic chapter of life, I came to see that most of my exhaustion didn't come from what was happening around me, but from how I reacted to it. I often fell into negative emotions, frustrated when things didn't go my way, irritated when others didn't act as I expected. And from there, I blamed, gave up, or turned on myself. But the deeper I went into Stoicism, the more I learned to pause, to step back, and ask, what can I do with myself in this moment? Gradually, I began building small habits to train my inner world, not reacting instantly, writing down negative thoughts, choosing silence when angry, and especially beginning each morning with presence instead of haste. These small shifts didn't make me perfect, but they gave me something far greater, a sense of agency. I was no longer swept along by life. I was beginning to live with direction and choice. And to me, that is true freedom. If you've made it this far, it means something inside you is already stirring. A desire to understand yourself more deeply, to live with greater meaning, and to rethought the inner steadiness the world so often strips away. Stoicism doesn't promise ease, but it offers a solid foundation from which to meet difficulty with clarity and strength. Every small principle shared in today's video, if practiced consistently, will slowly shape a stronger, wiser, and freer version of who you are. Don't let what you've heard remain a passing inspiration. Choose one idea, one action, one small shift, and begin practicing it today. If you found this content meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss future videos. And if you're serious about your journey of growth, be sure to check out the next videos on this channel. They may hold the next step you've been looking for. I'll see you there.